Is the source of the UAP phenomenon local rather than extraterrestrial? Does potential non-human intelligence actually originate on Earth instead of some distant star system? Could they be a parallel civilization distantly related to Homo sapiens, or a completely different species that evolved to intelligence millions of years ago, now residing underground, under the ocean, or on the moon? Perhaps the clues to this potential origin for NHI are right under our noses. Hello everyone, and welcome to UAP as NHI. I'm your host Bill Sego, and today I'll be discussing the most significant aspects of the Ultraterrestrial/Cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, and offering reasons why an ancient parallel civilization might be directly related to the UAP phenomenon. While most of the evidence is anecdotal, circumstantial, or unsubstantiated, I'm going to explain why that shouldn't discourage the UFO community from taking this hypothesis just as seriously as any other. In fact, it may turn out there's actually more evidence, at least more indirect evidence, supporting a cryptoterrestrial interpretation than any other origin idea. This is the first episode in a 5-part origin series that explores different potential sources for non-human intelligence related to the UAP phenomenon. Due to the amount of material, this particular topic will span 2 episodes. Episodes 3, 4, and 5 will then focus on the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the interdimensional hypothesis, and the extratempestrial model, culminating in a final episode featuring the NHI origin likelihood chart. Of course, that assumes I can reasonably cover each of those other topics within a single episode. The chart aims to calculate the most likely point of origin for non-human intelligence in our vicinity based on various observed characteristics of UAP and NHI behavior. While this process is admittedly limited by our own evolutionary perspective, it still offers a structured way to interpret what we can perceive. ChatGPT will assist in calculating numerical values for the chart using logical deduction and process of elimination methods to ensure as little bias as possible. Although more specific interpretations for NHI origins do exist, nearly all of them fall under one of the 4 main categories I'll be presenting. For example, if the intelligence associated with UAP is artificial, let's say they're manufactured entities, the origin of those creations still traces back to a biological source. Even if they're artificial constructs built by a race from another galaxy, the ultimate origin is still extraterrestrial, assuming that race itself is biological. So there's no need for a separate synthetic category because their creation wouldn't be autonomous. In short, the intelligence behind these entities would still stem from biological aliens who created synthetic avatars or advanced AI in their own image. A side note, if they are extraterrestrial avatars or AI constructs, then modeling them after humans rather than gray beings with large black eyes might have made interactions with us far more manageable and far less traumatizing. Other possibilities, such as angels, demons, or transuniversal simulation architects, for example the simulation hypothesis, fall under the interdimensional hypothesis. That's because their ultimate source of origin would lie in a realm or dimension beyond our perception. An angel or demon that appears reptilian, gray, or otherwise would still likely originate from an alternate dimension, even if some prefer to call it heaven or hell. Similarly, an intelligence that created this universe as a virtual construct would have to exist in a higher dimensional reality. So even if more nuanced interpretations exist, most theories can be categorized within one of the 4 main origin frameworks we're capable of conceptualizing. A short disclaimer. Everything discussed in this 2-part episode is speculative, a thought experiment meant to explore potential explanations for the anecdotal or circumstantial evidence tied to the UTH and CTH. Presenting a full account of all such evidence in under 4 hours would be impossible. A comprehensive paper, or more realistically, an entire book, would be required to combine all these ideas into a coherent hypothesis. And even then, the evidence would lead in too many directions. That said, exploring these concepts philosophically is the best we can do until substantiated evidence becomes available. For instance, if it were proven that some of the Nazca mummies were genuine specimens from a parallel non-human civilization, we could begin narrowing variables to form a cohesive theory. But for now, everything in these next 2 episodes rests on circumstantial evidence. Still, it's worth having the conversation with an open mind and without clinging to any single narrative. When viewed collectively, these ideas form a web of connections that might suggest a legitimate case for the CTH or UTH. The cryptoterrestrial hypothesis does have one major disadvantage, provided we exclude any interdimensional elements associated with the ultraterrestrial interpretation. It avoids many of the common counterarguments made against the extraterrestrial hypothesis. For example, there's no need to violate the speed of light or warp the space-time continuum if they're already here. There's no question of why they resemble us or are humanoid, since they would naturally share some of our DNA. And the global frequency of sightings also makes more sense if their origin is local. These 3 counterarguments, frequently cited by skeptics of the ETH, are effectively removed when the CTH is considered. There are others, but those are the main 3. As I go through each hypothesis in its respective episode, I'll mainly present arguments in support of each one, while occasionally presenting opposing points. Striking that balance will be challenging, and I'll do my best to avoid subconsciously pushing my own biases before we reach the final episode focused on the origin likelihood chart. Of course, I'm human, I do have biases, and they may show through at times. But the goal of the chart is to reduce that bias by objectively assessing the evidence, assigning values, and calculating the outcome. I'll be using ChatGPT to help determine those values through a structured, non-biased process of elimination, minimizing the influence of my own assumptions. That said, I admit I've caught myself trying to predict what the final chart will conclude, even though I haven't assigned point values yet. While I gave some examples in the introductory episode, they were just that, examples. None of the values are finalized, and many data points haven't even been assessed. So in truth, I have no idea what the final outcome will be. If I had to guess, I suspect it will land on either the CTH or ETH, or possibly a combination of both. My reasoning is simple. These 2 models don't require an additional major unknown. For instance, the interdimensional hypothesis requires a higher dimensional realm, something we can't yet detect or measure, let alone know for certain exists as a place that can support a higher intelligence. The extraterrestrial model requires time travel as an additional unknown. The ETH might require faster than light travel, but as I've discussed in earlier episodes, interstellar mobility doesn't necessarily depend on exotic technology. They could have arrived millions of years ago using more conventional means and established a permanent presence to observe or experiment on life here. By contrast, the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis doesn't technically require any extra unknowns, aside from the inherent assumption that another intelligent species evolved beyond us and are present on this planet. That's the same assumption we begin with when considering any NHI origin. So arguing that Earth needed the right conditions to support another intelligent civilization doesn't really disqualify the idea, especially since Earth has had plenty of time for such a development, even if no direct evidence remains. And any such evidence, if it ever did exist, would likely have been long buried or erased. Rejecting the CTH based on a lack of evidence essentially means rejecting the idea of NHI altogether, which defeats the purpose of exploring these hypotheses in the first place. So let's be clear. For the sake of this series, we must begin with the foundational assumption that non-human intelligence does exist and is interacting with our world via UAP. That's our starting point for all four origin possibilities. Now let's clarify the distinction between ultraterrestrial and cryptoterrestrial. While there are differences, both hypotheses generally describe a parallel civilization with Earth as its ultimate origin. An advanced civilization that evolved either before or alongside hominids would be considered cryptoterrestrial. The term is sometimes, though perhaps mistakenly, applied to hidden Earth creatures like Bigfoot, Nessie, or Mothman. However, cryptid is a more appropriate term for primitive, non-technological beings not typically associated with UAP. In this context, only one kind of cryptoterrestrial applies: an advanced species that evolved either from dinosaurs, an unknown lineage, or a coexisting hominin species that branch off from our evolutionary path. These beings would be physical entities from our own 3D reality, who simply advanced earlier and possibly in secret. No interdimensional element is necessary. In contrast, ultraterrestrials are essentially cryptoterrestrials that eventually develop the ability to access higher dimensional realms. John Keel coined the term ultraterrestrial in the late 1960s, a modern extension of the CTH that incorporates elements of the interdimensional hypothesis. In his 1970 book, Operation Trojan Horse, Keel proposed that these beings might be interdimensional, psychic, or native to Earth, but hidden, capable of manipulating perception, space-time, and appearing in various cultural guises, for example, gods, fairies, demons, and UFO occupants. The key distinction I want to stress is this: ultraterrestrials are not from another dimension, they've simply learned to access one. They would have arisen from natural evolutionary processes and later developed interdimensional capabilities. This differs from the interdimensional hypothesis, which posits that higher dimensional realms are the actual origin of NHI. So if a civilization originated from an interdimensional domain, even one that shares a local space-time with Earth, that would fall strictly under the interdimensional hypothesis. Ultraterrestrials, on the other hand, would have evolved here first, then reached a level of advancement that enabled them to traverse or utilize interdimensional space for travel, concealment, or even habitation. I admit the terminology can get murky. Early in this podcast program, I made mistakes myself, confusing elements of the CTH with the UTH. It's easy to do given how many variations exist within each theory. Finally, while topics like potential underground bases or structures on the Moon or Mars aren't exclusive to the CTH, they're most logically considered Earth-based in origin, at least on the surface. The same goes for the Greys, who resemble humanoid beings and might share Earth-like DNA. That's why I included these topics in this episode, but they're not exclusive to the CTH. Similar arguments could support the ETH if such beings arrived millions of years ago and built those structures for long-term study. Convergent evolution is a valid concept, so it's not outlandish to consider that a similar humanoid form could arise elsewhere. Ultimately, each hypothesis could plausibly claim some of the same evidence, depending on interpretation. But for the purpose of this series, we're looking at which origin seems most likely when viewed through the most straightforward lens. At this point, you might be wondering how such an advanced race of beings could have evolved independently and remain largely unknown to us, especially given the geological timelines accepted by the scientific community. How could there have been enough time in Earth's 4.5 billion year history for intelligent life to have emerged not once, but possibly multiple times? Could a species have branched off from the hominin line long before Homo sapiens and eventually come to resemble what we now describe as the typical gray? Some models, proposed by a handful of academics, suggest there has indeed been enough time for this to have occurred, potentially more than once, despite the absence of physical evidence. I've even developed a few hypothetical evolutionary timeline models of my own, which I'll present in part 2 of this episode. We now know that many hominin species coexisted with our own during the course of human evolution. Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, and likely others yet to be discovered. Some of these species existed for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years before Homo sapiens appeared. That's significantly more time than we've had, and yet we've already developed a science and technology that would have seemed incomprehensible just 200 years ago. This suggests a parallel civilization would have had more than enough time to develop a level of technology well beyond our comprehension, especially if it went underground to avoid extinction at the hands of more aggressive or primitive hominins, continuing to evolve out of sight, beyond our likeness, and beyond our level of intelligence. Perhaps the reason we struggle to understand their presence and technology is similar to how chimpanzees would struggle to understand us. Imagine a chimpanzee who has never encountered a human or a vehicle suddenly crossing paths with both. What would it think? Could it even process what it was seeing? You might also wonder, if we're such a danger to the ecosystem, then why would they let us thrive? Why not just wipe us out, especially if they're technologically superior and concerned about our nuclear capabilities? Perhaps they're like us in that regard. Maybe some factions do support our extinction, while others still hold out hope that we'll eventually figure things out. It's possible they need us for reasons we don't yet understand. That could explain the wide range of witness reports about their motives, some describing them as benevolent, others claiming they're harmful or indifferent. But before diving too far into speculative territory, let's ground things in some generally agreed upon facts. Our sun and solar system began forming a little over 4.5 billion years ago, and Earth itself took shape right around the same time. A wide range of evidence supports this, including radiometric dating of meteorites, the age of lunar samples, and the oldest minerals found on Earth. These all point to a consistent planetary timeline. Life is believed to have appeared roughly 3.5 billion years ago in the form of stromatolites and microfossils. Some graphite deposits in northern Canada suggest microbial life might have existed even 4 billion years ago, a 500 million year head start from prior estimates. Multicellular life is thought to have emerged around 1.5 billion years ago, following an extended 3 billion year period dominated by single-celled organisms. Then came the Cambrian explosion, around 540 million years ago, when complex life with eyes, exoskeletons, nervous systems, and mobility rapidly evolved within a window of just 10 to 20 million years. The first dinosaurs appeared roughly 240 million years ago, and the first mammals followed around 225 million years ago. Primates entered the scene about 55 million years ago, with the first hominin species arriving approximately 6 million years ago. Homo habilis, the earliest known member of the genus Homo, appeared about 2.8 million years ago, while Homo sapiens emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. Modern humans, or Homo sapiens sapiens, trace back to around 200,000 years. So where could an intelligent pre-human or parallel civilization fit into these timescales? And are there any mainstream hypotheses that support such a possibility? Could intelligence have emerged more than once, perhaps independently in a non-hominin species? Or maybe as a cryptoterrestrial offshoot from the hominin line, evolving uniquely in a subterranean environment? Some scientists, including astronomer Jason Wright, suggest that intelligence might not be a singular event in Earth's history. Evolution tends toward increasing complexity, so intelligence may have arisen and been lost multiple times. If a prior intelligent species did emerge millions of years ago, it could have gone extinct without leaving clear evidence. Fringe theories propose the existence of advanced pre-human civilizations lost to cataclysmic events. A more recent example is the idea that an advanced human civilization may have thrived before or during the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago. Catastrophic events, such as those proposed by the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, might have wiped out such a culture, leaving behind only myths and unexplained megalithic sites. Göbekli Tepe, estimated at around 11,000 years old, and worldwide flood myths are often cited as circumstantial evidence. However, these ideas describe potential breakaway human civilizations. They don't directly explain a parallel non-human civilization, unless we suppose that some members of such a civilization lived among humans and guided our development. Perhaps select NHI volunteered or were assigned to interact with humanity and steer us along a certain path. Now let's go further back, long before humans were even a concept. In 2018, the Silurian hypothesis was proposed by NASA scientists Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank. It explored the idea that an advanced civilization, industrial or otherwise, could have existed millions of years ago but left no trace due to geological processes such as erosion, subduction, and plate tectonics. If a civilization existed in deep time, its remnants would likely be destroyed or buried far beneath the surface. The name Silurian is borrowed from the Doctor Who series, referencing an intelligent reptilian species. An evolved species of dinosaur would also apply to the idea. This idea is not supported by physical evidence. It's a thought experiment. However, it raises important questions. Humanity's industrial era has lasted only about 300 years, and yet it has already left a detectable Anthropocene footprint. But given a few million years, much of that footprint could vanish. If a past civilization used mostly biodegradable or organic materials instead of metal, its remnants would be even harder to detect. And if it arose tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, geological recycling would likely have erased almost all traces, unless remnants still exist on the moon, deep underground, beneath the ocean, or are being actively hidden today. Indirect evidence may also support something like the Silurian hypothesis. For instance, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, occurred about 56 million years ago and is considered one of the most dramatic climate events in Earth's history. Lasting around 200,000 years, it saw a global temperature increase of 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. The Arctic Ocean reached tropical temperatures. Massive carbon releases, possibly from methane hydrates, volcanic eruptions, or other sources, led to widespread extinctions and species migrations. Ocean acidity spiked, devastating marine ecosystems. This permanently altered Earth's climate. Then there are the Eocene layers of mysterious origin, geological strata dating from 56 to 34 million years ago that contain odd features, unusual fossils, or unexplained geochemical markers. Some of the more intriguing anomalies include lignitic and coal-bearing layers in polar regions. These indicate swampy ecosystems with palm trees and crocodiles existed near the Arctic Circle, suggesting an Earth far warmer than today. Fringe theorists propose artificial terraforming, while mainstream science attributes this to high CO2 and orbital dynamics. Fossil distribution anomalies. Tropical species like alligators, palm trees, and turtles have been found in now temperate or polar regions, often in large numbers. This implies rapid climate shifts or unexplained migration patterns. Some layers are also unusually well preserved. For example, the Messel Pit in Germany, an Eocene Lagerstätte, which preserves entire ecosystems, including soft tissue. Strange extinction and turnover events. The Eocene-Oligocene transition, around 34 million years ago, brought sudden extinctions and dramatic species turnover without any confirmed asteroid strike or supervolcano. Proposed causes include glaciation, methane releases, or unknown impact events. Electromagnetic or isotopic anomalies. Some strata contain magnetic field reversals, iridium spikes, or unusual carbon and oxygen isotope ratios that don't fully align with volcanic or impact models. The PETM itself shows a massive carbon isotope spike over a short time, and though it predates the Eocene proper, it shaped the entire epoch. Fringe claims of anomalous artifacts. Occasionally, researchers or fringe theorists claim to have found artificial-looking objects or formations in Eocene rock, tools, structures, or out-of-place features. These are almost always dismissed as natural concretions, pseudofossils, or contaminations, but some are unusual enough to resist easy explanation. An argument often made against the ultraterrestrial or cryptoterrestrial hypothesis rests on a central question. Why would an advanced civilization already present and established somewhere in the planet allow humanity to evolve to a point where we've essentially taken over the surface, forcing our predecessors to retreat underground? One possibility is that millions of years ago, an evolved pre-hominid species was forced into those environments by a massive natural disaster, an impending asteroid impact, or a world-ending war. Alternatively, a later offshoot of the hominin line, perhaps around 300,000 years ago, may have initially sought shelter in underground caverns to escape an ice age or the aggression of other hominins competing for surface resources. Over time, their domains expanded deeper into the earth as their species adapted and thrived. As they adjusted to subterranean life, evolutionary pressures may have led to larger eyes, paler complexions, and longer, more slender digits, traits associated with the typical gray. Such features align with what one might expect from a species evolving in low-light underground environments. Perhaps while the surface world carried on and evolved its own form of intelligence, this hidden civilization advanced far beyond our own capabilities. One might argue that, at some point, their civilization became so advanced that returning to the surface was no longer desirable. But if they're capable of constructing anti-gravity craft, then surely building protective domes or controlled surface environments would be just as feasible. So why stay hidden? It may be that coexisting with a relatively intelligent but aggressive species offers little appeal. At the same time, they may have no desire to destroy us. Perhaps they follow a kind of prime directive, avoiding interference with newly emergent sentient life. Our rapid rise in intelligence, despite its aggressive tendencies, and especially our development of nuclear technology, may have prompted them to take unprecedented interest in our civilization. Whether to protect their own interests or ours, they might have decided to keep a much closer eye on us, particularly since the 1940s. Interesting to note also is that any detectable signature of nuclear detonations would take considerably more time than just a few years to reach an intelligent civilization from another star system. How do we explain why sightings really ramped up not long after we attained nuclear technology if they weren't already here and possibly cryptoterrestrial? Ideas surrounding cryptoterrestrial possibilities are endless, but if non-human intelligence is indeed present, all such scenarios remain viable. Another reason for their hesitance to reveal themselves, assuming they hold a reverence for life and no intent to destroy us, could be explained by the dark forest hypothesis. In this scenario, they may avoid provoking a hornet's nest, fearing global retaliation or a human-led campaign to discover and infiltrate their hidden domains. If they lack the will or means to completely annihilate us, staying hidden at all costs may be the wisest course. The dark forest hypothesis was popularized by Liu Cixin in his 2008 science fiction novel, The Dark Forest, part of the three-body problem trilogy. It offers a solution to the Fermi paradox, which asks why we haven't observed evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations despite the vastness of the universe. The same concept might equally apply to one civilization on a shared planet hiding itself from another. Such a civilization could employ advanced camouflage, take advantage of our limited sensory and technological capabilities, and even run disinformation campaigns, convincing us they're from another star system, to ensure their continued anonymity. The core idea is this: the universe is like a dark forest. Each civilization is a silent hunter, hiding for fear that revealing its presence will invite destruction. The hypothesis rests on several key assumptions. 1. Civilizations seek to survive. 2. Resources are finite. 3. You can never be certain of another civilization's intentions. And 4. A preemptive strike may be rational if another civilization is perceived as a potential threat. Because of this uncertainty, the safest strategy is silence. Broadcasting one's location through radio signals or visible megastructures might attract a powerful, hostile species that eliminates you before you become a threat. So the apparent silence of the cosmos may not be due to a lack of intelligent life, but because everyone is hiding. Ultimately, there is no conclusive evidence for the Silurian hypothesis, Cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, or any other notion of a parallel or breakaway civilization. However, that doesn't mean we should dismiss these ideas outright. Earth's vast and ancient history provides ample time for intelligent life to have emerged more than once. If we seriously consider reports of humanoid beings that resemble us and appear to share terrestrial DNA, then Earth itself must remain on the table as a possible point of origin. An advanced human civilization, no matter how extraordinary, would not account for the majority of UAP or NHI encounters. What people are witnessing often involves intelligences that appear distinctly non-human and vastly more advanced. While some reports do describe technologically advanced humans or human-like entities, such as the so-called tall whites, those are exceptions. Only a separate species that evolved hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago could plausibly account for the vast majority of UAP-related encounters. Earth and the Moon offer numerous locations for such a species to thrive while remaining mostly hidden. The Greys. The most commonly reported form of non-human intelligence is undoubtedly the Greys. They appear in more encounter accounts than any other type of being. While many different kinds of NHI have been reported throughout history, such as reptilians, mantids, the tall whites, and others, the Greys remain the most prominent. If we take reports of these other beings seriously, then we may be forced to lean more toward the extraterrestrial or interdimensional hypotheses, but that's a discussion for another episode. While it's not impossible that 2 or even all 4 origin possibilities could contain some degree of truth, the likelihood of such a scenario is slim and would directly violate Occam's razor. However, if reports of multiple species besides the Greys are to be accepted, then the only alternative explanation within the framework of the CTH or UTH would involve either 1. Multiple species, for example, insects, dinosaurs, distinct human ancestors, evolving intelligence independently over time, or 2. A single advanced species predating Homo sapiens, who then bioengineered various others using Earth-based DNA. As a side note, the overall humanoid appearance of the Greys also lends support to the extratempestrial model, as proposed by Michael Masters, but this would apply exclusively to the Greys. It ultimately depends on how you interpret cases that depict entirely different types of beings. If such cases are credible and these beings represent genetically distinct creations, then the idea of bioengineering using local DNA must be considered. Still, credible reports of very different species may pose a challenge to both the ETM and CTH. Another thing to consider is that if there are multiple species or subgroups of Greys, with subtle variations as reported in encounters across different cultures and time periods, this could reflect separate hominin species evolving in isolation under different environmental pressures. If multiple hominin groups around the world went underground to escape various surface dangers, each would face unique conditions. As a result, differences in 1. The hominin species they descended from, 2. The nature of their specific subterranean environments, and 3. Any intentional modifications to their evolutionary path could lead to slight distinctions in appearance. but that would only explain variations of the Greys, not entirely different types of beings that may have originated from dinosaurs or other presumably extinct species. Just as humanity features different races across regions of Earth while still being the same species, a divergent hominin line could have evolved in more pronounced ways, especially over long timescales. Eventually, they may have decided to coexist or collaborate, assuming they even get along in the first place. Then again, some of the differences in reported descriptions might not reflect different species at all, but rather differences in perception, especially since many eyewitnesses describe these beings while in altered states of consciousness during abduction experiences. The Greys are generally described as having large, forward-facing black eyes, pale, possibly translucent skin, no hair, and long, slender fingers. These features are consistent with what we might expect from a species that evolved underground, away from the sun. A more detailed breakdown of why a subterranean species might resemble the Grey archetype will be featured in Part 2, including the environmental factors and potential living conditions that could have shaped their development. Throughout ancient history and across nearly every culture on Earth, we find folklore and oral traditions describing beings similar to the Greys, not to mention cave paintings and carvings that resemble their appearance. One such example is the Montandane, a term from southern African traditions, particularly Zulu folklore. These beings are described as mysterious, otherworldly entities bearing a striking resemblance to the modern Grey. However, the African oral tradition provides even more nuanced accounts. According to Zulu shaman and oral historian Credo Mutwa, the Montandane have been known to African shamans and tribes for generations. They are often associated with abductions and covert interactions with humanity. The Montandane are described as humanoid, but distinctly different in appearance. They have enlarged, bulbous heads, hairless bodies, and massive, glossy black almond-shaped eyes said to possess a hypnotic or paralyzing effect. Their mouths are tiny, often no more than a thin slit, and they rarely speak. Their bodies are described as frail, with long, spindly limbs, sometimes giving them an insectoid-like appearance. Unlike modern descriptions of smooth, gray skin, some accounts describe their skin as pale brown or reddish, with textures compared to reptilian or amphibian surfaces. Some say they have 3 or 4 fingers on each hand, which interestingly matches the tridactyl Nazca mummies still being examined by parts of the scientific community. Like modern Grey aliens, the Montandane are described as having small nostrils, no visible ears, and a mechanical, rigid way of moving, along with a disturbing stillness when at rest. If Greys are purely a modern creation, as some skeptics claim, then how do we explain these ancient similarities? Zulu shamans have long said the Montandane kidnap humans, especially at night, and communicate not through spoken words but telepathically. They're known to implant thoughts and emotions directly into the minds of those they encounter. I explore this possibility more in Part 2, where I consider whether telepathy could evolve naturally in subterranean species over hundreds of thousands of years. Some African legends even suggest that the Montandane have conducted genetic experiments on humans, a theme that appears in modern UFO abduction narratives as well. While not always described as malevolent, they are often portrayed as cunning and manipulative, using telepathy to pacify or control. Credo Mutwa believed they were associated with a more powerful reptilian species known as the Chitauri, believed to have once ruled over humanity. According to Mutwa, the Montandane, and possibly the Chitauri, shared telepathic messages warning of technology's misuse. These beings reportedly cautioned that technological advancement without spiritual wisdom would lead not to liberation, but enslavement. He claimed modern humans were falling under the illusion of progress through technology while losing their spiritual connection to nature and the cosmos. He warned of a time when humans would be monitored constantly, ruled by soulless thinking machines that would eventually enslave their creators. While he never used the term artificial intelligence, his descriptions eerily parallel modern concerns about AI, mass surveillance, and digital control. This theme also aligns with much later reports, such as those from the aerial school incident in Zimbabwe in 1994. Over 60 students witnessed a craft land near the school and saw typical gray beings emerge. One student, Lizzle Field, described receiving a telepathic message as the being stood nearby. She said, "It was like in the world, all the trees would just go down and there would be no air and people would be dying." Another student, Emma Christensen, recalled, "What I thought they were telling us was maybe the world's going to end. I think they want people to know that we're actually making harm on this world and we mustn't get too technologed." Even though the event took place in Africa, it's unlikely the students had prior knowledge of Zulu folklore, especially at their age. While this could be coincidental, the similarity to African accounts of telepathic warnings is compelling. Other global traditions echo similar themes. The Hopi and Zuni tribes of North America speak of the ant people, beings with large heads, dark eyes, and thin limbs who live underground and helped humans survive great cataclysms. They were seen as benevolent and knowledgeable, teaching survival skills, agriculture, and astronomy. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia described the Anunnaki and Igigi. The Igigi were portrayed as pale, hairless beings with elongated heads and slanted eyes, smaller servant-class gods to the Anunnaki. Some researchers believe these descriptions mirror those of the Greys, with the Igigi serving roles akin to bioengineered workers. The Dogon tribe in Mali tell of the Namo, amphibious beings from the Sirius star system who brought knowledge and were depicted with large heads, elongated bodies, and prominent eyes. Remarkably, the Dogon had advanced astronomical knowledge, including of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye. The Maya and Aztecs of Central America described sky visitors, small, large-headed beings who descended from the sky in a metallic craft. Their myths mention telepathic communication and feature visual depictions eerily similar to modern gray imagery. In Australia, the Wandjina are sky spirits featured in Aboriginal rock art. Tall, pale, hairless, and black-eyed, they resemble greys almost exactly and are said to have guided early human development. Early Japanese myths include the Kappa and other sky beings, small humanoids with bulbous heads arriving in glowing, hollow ships. These beings were mysterious and often associated with knowledge from above. South American tribes such as the Aymara, Quechua, and Guarani describe the star people, thin, hairless, large-headed beings who visited Earth and imparted wisdom. Many petroglyphs from these regions depict such figures. Telepathy is a recurring theme. Ancient Indian texts speak of the Vimanas and Asuras, beings from the stars who arrived in flying crafts. Pale, luminous beings with large heads piloting these vehicles sound remarkably like modern UAP reports. The recurring appearance of thin, hairless, large-eyed beings across so many unrelated cultures, long before the modern gray archetype emerged, suggests something more than coincidence. While the gray image is a 20th century construct, these global accounts say otherwise. And the examples I just provided represent only a fraction of the lore available. Civilizations including the Celts, Norse, Chinese, Inuit, and Polynesians have all described beings of similar appearance and behavior arriving from the sky or underground, bearing advanced knowledge, communicating telepathically, and influencing humanity's development. Ancient Alien Hypothesis. The ancient alien hypothesis, also known as the ancient astronaut theory, proposes that extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in ancient times and played a significant role in shaping early human civilization. Proponents suggest these entities may have influenced humanity's development in culture, technology, and religion, and were perhaps even mistaken for gods by our ancestors. Key ideas include: ancient structures like the pyramids or Stonehenge were built with alien assistance. Mythologies and religious texts contain descriptions of alien encounters. Advanced ancient knowledge in areas such as astronomy, mathematics, and engineering came from non-human visitors. Mainstream archaeology and science reject this theory, citing a lack of credible evidence and emphasizing the ingenuity of ancient human societies. That said, the title Ancient Alien Hypothesis might actually be a misnomer. It may be more accurate to call it the Ancient NHI Hypothesis, though that's arguably splitting hairs. While the term includes the word alien, that doesn't mean the theory is strictly aligned with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Rather, the word alien is used here as a stand-in for any kind of non-human intelligence, which could originate from any of the four main origin models discussed throughout this series. As I emphasized in the introductory episode, the term alien should not be exclusively reserved for extraterrestrials. Any form of non-human intelligence that we are unfamiliar with would, by definition, be alien to us. That being said, the two most plausible origin interpretations for this hypothesis are the extraterrestrial and cryptoterrestrial models, as they align more closely with the core ideas. While the interdimensional or extratempestrial models could also apply, the former interpretations better fit the overall narrative. Supporters of the ancient alien hypothesis typically point to several categories of evidence they believe suggest non-human influence in ancient times. Though none of these are accepted by mainstream archaeology as definitive proof, they remain the most frequently cited examples. Ancient megastructures. Structures like the pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge, and Baalbek are argued to demonstrate a level of precision, scale, and engineering that may have exceeded the capabilities of ancient humans, especially without the benefit of modern tools or machines. Baalbek, for instance, contains stones weighing hundreds of tons, yet they were reportedly transported and placed with astonishing precision. Ancient texts and mythologies. Sumerian tablets and deities such as the Anunnaki are sometimes interpreted as records of ancient astronauts who genetically altered early humans. Biblical accounts like Ezekiel's vision of a wheel within a wheel are seen by some as descriptions of spacecraft. Hindu texts also describe flying machines called vimanas in works such as the Mahabharata, which many interpret as advanced aerial vehicles. Out-of-place artifacts. Items like the so-called Baghdad battery are seen as examples of ancient technology that shouldn't have existed at the time. The Nazca lines in Peru, vast geoglyphs only fully visible from the air, are interpreted by some as navigational aids or signals for aerial observation. Other examples include precisely drilled holes in hard stone or metal components found in layers of rock that seem far too old to contain such objects. Ancient art and depictions. Carvings, paintings, and sculptures that resemble modern astronauts of spacecraft are frequently cited. One well-known example is the Rocket Man depiction in the Mayan Palenque tomb, which some interpret as a figure sitting in a cockpit. Other ancient figurines also seem to resemble people in flight suits or helmets. Sudden leaps in human evolution and civilization. Gaps in the fossil record or abrupt surges in intelligence and innovation, such as the rapid rise of Sumerian civilization, are sometimes seen as possible indicators of external influence. Theories of genetic manipulation, where early hominins were altered to become Homo sapiens, also fall under this line of thinking. Of course, the evidence cited in support of this hypothesis is vast, far too much to cover in a single episode. The television series Ancient Aliens has popularized many of these ideas and continues to explore them in depth. While some episodes delve into highly speculative or even outlandish territory, the show continues undeterred in its effort to present possible alternatives to mainstream narratives. An alternative explanation to the ancient alien hypothesis is that some of these mysterious ancient structures were the result of advanced breakaway human civilizations, not alien ones. In such cases, the builders were simply humans who possessed knowledge or technologies that were later lost to history. If this scenario is supported by sufficient evidence, there would be no need to invoke extraterrestrial or cryptoterrestrial intervention. However, if there are accounts or traditions suggesting that non-human intelligence assisted early humans during key developmental periods, then both ideas may be partially correct. That is, some ancient cultures may have built incredible structures using lost human knowledge, while others may have received guidance or interference from an outside intelligence. Underground bases and underwater domains. The idea that non-human intelligences might maintain underwater or underground bases is a recurring theme, both in fringe science and in some serious UAP investigations. While no conclusive evidence has been presented to prove the existence of such bases, there are several intriguing points of circumstantial evidence, eyewitness accounts, and official documents that some interpret as suggestive of the possibility. One compelling line of circumstantial evidence involves unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, the underwater equivalent of UFOs or UAP. These are craft-like objects seen entering or exiting the ocean or moving beneath the surface at speeds that defy known technology. One key case is the USS Princeton and Nimitz encounter in 2004. Alongside the famous Tic Tac UAP sightings, sonar operators reportedly detected a large submerged object beneath the Tic Tac that moved independently of known ocean currents. Russian naval encounters during the Soviet era were also reported in declassified documents, describing USO encounters in deep lakes and oceans. Retired Russian Navy officers have claimed that these objects would evade submarines using maneuvers indicative of intelligent control. The 2013 Aguadilla sighting in Puerto Rico features DHS infrared footage showing a flying object that entered the ocean without slowing down, then seemingly split into two objects underwater before vanishing. There are also several geographic hotspots associated with oceans or cave systems. These locations are persistent centers of UAP activity and are often near large bodies of water or geological anomalies. Catalina Island off the California coast is a well-known UAP hotspot, with many reports of craft entering or exiting the Pacific Ocean. Puerto Rico's coastal waters and El Yunque National Forest are also frequent sites of aerial and underwater anomalies. Norway's Hesteland Valley is famous for mysterious lights, possibly linked to deep underground geological features. Dulce, New Mexico is home to long-standing, albeit highly speculative, claims of underground NHI bases, often connected with military installations and reports of bizarre phenomena. The lack of detectable infrastructure to explain these sudden appearances and disappearances suggests local origins for some UAP, possibly underground or underwater. UAP and USO sightings often lack radar signatures indicating approach or departure, further implying that they may originate nearby. Given that the oceans cover roughly 70% of Earth's surface and remain largely unexplored, they would be a logical hiding place for an advanced intelligence. There are also persistent fringe reports of artificial structures deep within the Earth, often pyramidal or geometric in design, and potentially of ancient or non-human origin. For instance, China's mysterious pyramids in the Xi'an region are real pyramidal mounds, some sealed and never excavated. Local legends tell of celestial beings who descended and shared advanced knowledge. Some speculate that underground chambers exist but are restricted or classified. Alaska's Black Pyramid, supposedly located between Nome and Mount McKinley near Denali, is claimed to have been discovered by a military satellite in the 1990s. Allegedly more powerful than the Great Pyramid, it's theorized to be an energy generator or monitoring device. The area is said to be under tight military control and is also linked to strange disappearances within the so-called Alaska Triangle. No verified imagery exists, but whistleblowers such as Douglas Muchler have attempted to speak out about its existence. Claims of Cuban underwater pyramids off the coast of the Guanahatabibes Peninsula are based on sonar scans that appear to show pyramidal and city-like structures deep beneath the sea. Some believe these may be remnants of a pre-flood or non-human civilization, possibly connected to Atlantis or a submerged NHI base. Earth's crust is also home to vast natural cave systems and deep earth anomalies, including the Mammoth Cave System in Kentucky and Tennessee, Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, and Sun Dung in Vietnam, large enough to house a skyscraper. Some remote viewing experiments, particularly under Project Stargate, allegedly focused on deep structures and inaccessible regions believed to house non-human presences. Additional examples include core anomalies detected via seismology and are reflections or voids that remain unexplained. Or the bloop and other ultra-low frequency ocean sounds that lack natural explanations, prompting speculation about deep underwater technology or movement. Whistleblower and insider testimony also adds fuel to these claims, although none of it is substantiated. U.S. Army Sergeant Clifford Stone claimed to have been part of military crash retrieval teams and reported that some recovered craft were found not from crash sites, but in sealed underground chambers. Underground base researchers Dr. Michael Sala and Richard Sauter believe a global network of deep bases exists, some possibly used or operated by NHI. Sauter has published documents on black-budget tunneling projects that might support this possibility. Mythological and esoteric parallels further bolster this theme. Agartha and Shambhala from Tibetan lore describe advanced underground civilizations hidden from the surface world. The Hopi ant people, as previously discussed, are said to have sheltered humanity underground during ancient cataclysms. The Nagas of Hindu and Buddhist mythology are reptilian beings who are said to live in vast subterranean cities. These legends often describe non-human intelligences dwelling beneath the earth, not necessarily extraterrestrial, but possibly cryptoterrestrial, ultraterrestrial, or simply native to a forgotten epoch in Earth's history. Author and historian Richard Dolan is currently releasing a 3-part book series titled A History of USOs, which covers the most significant underwater UAP cases in history. The first volume is now available across major platforms, with the other 2 set to release later this year. It is the most comprehensive study of the USO phenomenon to date. For those interested in exploring the topic of hidden NHI domains further, a simple online search will turn up many other relevant books and studies. I'll also offer a few examples later in the episode. Structures on the Moon. While there are several proposed names for the idea of NHI structures on the Moon, covering aspects like bases or active presence, such as the artificial moon hypothesis or spaceship moon theory, none of them fully encompass the broader range of ideas the topic suggests. For that reason, I'll be referring to it as the Lunar Anomalies Hypothesis, or LAH, since this designation allows for any and all potential non-human use of the Moon, whether past or present. This includes not only the possibility of it being used as a base of operations, but also the more speculative notion that the Moon itself could be a manufactured object or even a type of Dyson sphere, collecting energy from the Sun in a unique way while maintaining proximity to Earth to observe its inhabitants. That might sound far-fetched, and it likely is, but there are still many oddities and mathematical coincidences regarding the Moon's size, distance, and orbital relationship with Earth and the Sun. At the very least, the Moon could be a natural object that was partially modified or hollowed out for such purposes. In that case, a cryptoterrestrial civilization, or some other form of NHI, may have had a hand in using it for reasons we still don't fully understand. George H. Leonard was one of the earliest and most influential voices to suggest the presence of artificial structures and non-human activity on the Moon, especially to a mainstream audience. His 1976 book, somebody else is on the moon, is considered foundational in the realm of lunar anomaly speculation. Leonard, a former NASA consultant and science writer, argued that NASA has actively concealed evidence of alien structures and ongoing activity. He claimed to have obtained and closely studied official NASA photographs, primarily from the Lunar Orbiter and Apollo missions, which he believed showed evidence of machines, mining operations, construction zones, and even artificial architecture. Leonard presented these arguments alongside grainy black and white NASA photos, pointing out what he interpreted as massive structures, towers, bridges, and excavation patterns that he insisted could not be naturally occurring. Furthermore, he believed these entities were still active, not just remnants of a long-abandoned operation. He also alleged that NASA had deliberately obscured or omitted many of these anomalies from public-facing reports and images, possibly to avoid public panic or to maintain secrecy around extraterrestrial contact. According to Leonard, the moon may be used as a base of operations, either for mining materials or for long-term observation of Earth. He also pointed to a long-standing history of reported unexplained lights, flashes, and movement on the moon, known as transient lunar phenomena, TLPs, as further evidence of ongoing activity. Leonard is far from the only researcher to make such claims. Many others have presented similar theories over the years, in both books and documentaries. Reading or listening to these sources is one thing, but seeing the photographic evidence for yourself as presented in documentaries can make these ideas much easier to process and visualize. I'll name several key titles shortly. These are not wild or arbitrary claims made by random internet personalities, but ideas proposed by credible individuals based on data, photographs, and testimony, anecdotal or otherwise. Some of the most significant books on this topic include the following: Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon by Don Wilson, 1975, explores the theory that the moon may be an artificial construct or hollow object, possibly of extraterrestrial origin, deliberately placed in orbit to observe Earth. Penetration: The Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy by Ingo Swann, 1998. Swann, known for his work in remote viewing, claimed to have seen structures and evidence of extraterrestrial activity on the moon during his psychic sessions. If remote viewing is ever validated, particularly by non-speakers, such as those featured on the podcast The Telepathy Tapes, Swann's testimony may gain newfound credibility. Dark Mission: The Secret History of NASA by Richard C. Hoagland and Mike Barra, 2007, argues that NASA has long suppressed knowledge of ancient lunar structures, artifacts, and symbols, some possibly connected to occult or esoteric traditions within the space program itself. Alien Base: The Evidence for Extraterrestrial Colonization of Earth by Timothy Good, 1998, includes claims of lunar anomalies, alien bases, and government cover-ups, tying the moon to a larger picture of extraterrestrial contact and concealment. Moongate: Suppressed Findings of the U.S. Space Program by William L. Bryan II, 1982, posits that NASA and the U.S. government have long known the moon holds unnatural features and possibly artificial origins. Who Built the Moon by Christopher Knight and Alan Butler, 2005, presents a provocative argument that the moon may be a deliberately engineered object constructed by an unknown intelligence and placed in orbit with mathematical precision. Lunar Anomalies: Are We Being Watched on the Moon by Mark J. Carlotto, 1996, uses advanced image analysis to assess unusual features on the lunar surface, many of which may suggest artificiality. Dark Side of the Moon by John K. Baylor, 2017, explores a range of theories and speculations about possible alien bases on the moon's far side, supported by historical mission records and photographic evidence. Lunar Anomalies: The Truth Behind the Moon's Mysteries by Robert A. Ferguson, 2019, compiles a wide range of reports and images, focusing on unusual formations, lights, and possible evidence of artificial constructs on the moon. Celestial Secrets: The Hidden History of the Moon by David Childress, 2014, explores anomalies in lunar history and structure, including theories that unknown civilizations may have left behind artifacts or structures. In terms of video documentaries, several are worth checking out. One such program is Apple TV's Alien Enigmas: UFOs on the Moon, 2023, which investigates various lunar phenomena, including UFO sightings during Apollo missions, anomalous surface markings, and unexplained objects trailing spacecraft. The documentary suggests that these anomalies may indicate an active alien presence using the moon as a monitoring station. Another well-known documentary is Aliens on the Moon: The Truth Exposed, 2014, available on Tubi. It features NASA footage, photographic analysis, and interviews with researchers who argue that there are visible structures on the moon, ones that NASA has either ignored or suppressed. YouTube also has an extensive archive of relevant material. One standout is Alien Moon, which examines the hypothesis that the moon itself may have an extraterrestrial origin. The documentary includes astronaut UFO encounters, speculation about dome structures, and photographic evidence from Apollo missions. For those who want an extended dive, the YouTube channel The Y-Files has a compilation over 2.5 hours long, perhaps one of the most well-produced summaries on the topic that isn't a full-length commercial documentary. My own introduction to this subject came in the 1990s from Richard Hoagland's 3-part program, The Moon-Mars Connection. In this presentation, Hoagland not only highlights alleged artificial structures on the moon, but also points to what he believed were remnants of transparent glass-like domes. Although the material feels dated now and may be harder to track down, it remains a strong introductory resource, especially as it leads into the related topic of potential artificial structures on Mars, which I'll be covering shortly. The list above demonstrates how extensive the support is for the idea that the moon is more than just a barren rock. There are even accounts from former NASA personnel that corroborate claims of lunar anomalies and potential concealment. One notable whistleblower is Ken Johnston, a former NASA contractor and manager of the Data and Photo Control Department for the Apollo missions. He claims he was ordered to destroy photos showing clear artificial structures or anomalies on the moon, but chose to keep some copies. According to Johnston, these images revealed artificial domes, towers, and possibly machinery, photographic proof of lunar activity that was deliberately hidden from the public. Another is Donna Hare, who worked for NASA contractors such as Philco Ford and held a secret clearance. Hare testified that some NASA employees were specifically tasked with airbrushing out anomalous features, like UFOs or structures, on lunar photographs before they were publicly released. She first went public at the 2001 National Press Club event organized by the Disclosure Project, and later repeated her testimony in 2013 during the citizen hearing on disclosure. In these testimonies, Hare recounted seeing a photograph that clearly showed a UFO and was told by a colleague that it was his job to remove such objects. She also heard from other Johnson Space Center employees that astronauts had witnessed extraterrestrial craft and were warned not to speak out. An interesting footnote to Hare's testimony is the case of Gary McKinnon, a Scottish hacker and former system administrator. He said that it was Hare's testimony that inspired him to hack into U.S. defense and NASA systems in 2001. McKinnon claimed to have discovered images and documents referencing UFOs, non-terrestrial technologies, and even a list of non-terrestrial officers, which he interpreted as evidence of a secret space program or off-world military presence. The U.S. government pursued him aggressively, threatening up to 70 years in prison. The case was highly publicized, and the UK ultimately refused to extradite him, likely saving him from a life sentence for what amounted to unauthorized access and computer misuse. Another witness, Carl Wolf, served as a U.S. Air Force precision electronics technician and worked with NASA's Lunar Orbiter program. Wolf claimed he was shown high-resolution images of the moon's far side in the 1960s while stationed at Langley Air Force Base. These images, according to him, clearly revealed artificial structures, buildings, towers, and geometry inconsistent with natural formations. He first went public with this testimony during the 2001 National Press Club event hosted by Stephen Greer and repeated his story many times over the years until his death in 2018. While his death was reported as a tragic accident, some in the UFO community speculate foul play, especially since it occurred shortly before he was scheduled to speak publicly again. Bob Dean, another respected whistleblower, was a retired U.S. Army Command Sergeant Major with a NATO intelligence background. He stated that NASA and other space agencies are well aware of artificial structures on both the Moon and Mars. According to Dean, classified photos exist that reveal massive alien facilities. The examples I've just presented are only the tip of the iceberg. The LAH is a deep rabbit hole with new threads appearing constantly. Even if only one official NASA photo was ever airbrushed to hide a structure, that single act would provide conclusive proof of artificial constructs on the Moon, regardless of whether we ever physically investigate the site or meet its builders. Intentional concealment would, in and of itself, constitute undeniable evidence that we're not being told the full truth about what's up there. And for that, no rocket scientist is required to make that leap. That brings us to our next topic, structures on Mars. When considering the possibility of intelligent life developing on Mars, the odds, at least based on current scientific understanding, are extremely slim. While early Mars may have had conditions conducive to supporting life, those favorable windows were likely far too brief for evolution to progress to the point of producing intelligent beings. The environmental stability necessary for life to evolve beyond the microbial stage into intelligent, tool-using organisms simply wasn't present for long enough, according to mainstream scientific consensus. That being said, the surface of Mars does feature some intriguing and hotly debated formations, particularly in the Cydonia region. Some of these structures, such as the so-called face on Mars and nearby geometric features, have led to speculation that artificial constructs may exist or once existed on the planet. If these anomalies are artificial, then the most logical explanation may not be that an intelligent species evolved on Mars itself, but rather that the intelligence behind them originated on Earth and later migrated there, perhaps establishing forward bases or research outposts in the distant past. Even though the evidence suggests a very narrow, perhaps negligible window for life to arise and evolve on Mars, if we entertain the idea as a remote possibility, then it would still fall under the umbrella of the Cryptoterrestrial Hypothesis rather than the more general extraterrestrial hypothesis. This is because even if intelligent life evolved on Mars, it still would have done so within our solar system. If such beings later migrated to Earth due to planetary collapse, war, or environmental catastrophe, then Earth would effectively become their second point of origin. And in this scenario, we would have to confront the possibility that life on Earth was seeded by Martians, making us the descendants of Martian origin. So while their origin might technically be considered alien in the broader sense, they wouldn't fall under the standard ETH definition involving interstellar visitors. They would still qualify as local, bound to the same solar system, and therefore could reasonably be categorized as cryptoterrestrial in origin. Alternatively, if Earth had the greater time span and environmental stability for intelligence to develop first, then it's more likely that an advanced Earth-based civilization expanded outward and colonized Mars, not the other way around. In that case, Mars may simply house abandoned outposts or remote bases left behind by an ancient cryptoterrestrial race. Regardless of the order of events, any civilization that arose from within this solar system, be it on Earth, Mars, or even a combination of the two, would still be considered cryptoterrestrial in nature. Whether or not that's technically the perfect classification is a matter of semantics, but from a logical standpoint, they would not be extraterrestrial in the traditional interstellar sense. To save time, I won't list out the numerous books, articles, and documentaries covering this idea in the same detail I did with the lunar anomalies hypothesis. If you're interested in exploring the topic further, a simple search will lead you to a wide array of resources. That said, I do highly recommend starting with Richard Hoagland's program, The Moon-Mars Connection, which does an excellent job of highlighting potential artificial features on both celestial bodies. As a related aside, it's worth noting that Venus is also sometimes brought into this conversation. Prior to its runaway greenhouse effect, Venus may have had a temperate climate and conditions favorable for life. It's not impossible that intelligent life could have developed there during a short window of habitability. However, much like Mars, the likelihood is quite low. Venus's hostile conditions today make it difficult to assess how long that early window may have lasted, if it existed at all. Of course, all of this hinges on whether current scientific estimates about the timing and condition of life's emergence on Earth are even correct. Nevertheless, while both Mars and Venus may have had brief moments of biological potential, Earth had the far greater opportunity for life to take root and evolve into intelligence. Statistically, biologically, and logically, Earth remains the most likely place for the origin of the intelligence behind the UAP phenomenon under the CTH umbrella, with Mars and Venus as distant secondary possibilities at best. Possible wild claims and other speculative ideas. Divergent versus convergent grays. Perhaps the Greys were actually a lost human population, one that evolved millions of years ago and, due to some cataclysm or great war, was forced to retreat underground or to the moon. Such a group may have diverged so radically that they no longer resemble Homo sapiens. Alternatively, they could represent a parallel civilization that naturally branched off from the hominin line hundreds of thousands of years ago due to extreme surface conditions, prompting them to move underground where they continued evolving in relative isolation. Either possibility would explain why they maintain a humanoid appearance and likely share DNA with other life forms on Earth. Prolonged adaptation to a subterranean environment might make returning to the surface both undesirable and unnecessary, especially if they became entirely self-sufficient underground. If they were essentially stuck there for millennia, physiological changes would be inevitable. Enlarged eyes for low-light environments, pale or translucent skin due to lack of sunlight, shorter stature due to confined living spaces, and elongated digits better suited for climbing, digging, or manipulation in tight quarters. If they later developed spacefaring technology, they may have established colonies on the moon. It's possible that some originally left Earth altogether, while others remained underground. Greys reported as 3 to 4 feet tall might reflect those adapted to Earth's subterranean conditions, whereas the taller 7 to 8 foot mantis-like varieties could be the result of prolonged habitation in lower gravity environments like the moon. That divergence could represent a divergent evolutionary process, retaining many traits of their Earth-adapted cousins, but altered by their new environment. Alternatively, the Greys, or similar humanoid beings, could be the product of convergent evolution, wherein different species evolve along similar lines because certain anatomical forms, like the humanoid body plan, are universally efficient for intelligence and tool use. In this case, similar creatures might evolve under the right conditions, whether on Earth, on another planet, or even in another dimension. Either way, whether they are the result of divergent evolution from a lost hominin lineage or convergent evolution from some other template, the Greys may have chosen to let surface life continue evolving on its own after they achieved intelligence. That includes us. Or perhaps they didn't just wait, they interfered, manipulating the DNA of early humans to accelerate our development, crafting a new hybrid lineage as a solution to their own stagnating gene pool. This might explain the hybridization narratives and reports of genetic experimentation. If they are a dying species or in need of a genetic boost, humanity could represent both their past and their future, providing them with the required genetic material. That would certainly explain their obsession with our nuclear capabilities, frequent appearances near power plants and disaster sites, and the warnings of environmental catastrophe and unchecked technological growth reported in encounters like the Ariel school incident. If they share our DNA, live on this planet, and require us for their own continuity, then their concern for our survival would be in their own best interest. An interdimensional connection. Some interpretations of the Ultraterrestrial Hypothesis, UTH, include crossover ideas that intersect with the interdimensional hypothesis, or even combine aspects of both. For instance, the presence of many distinct types of beings in UAP-related reports may appear to challenge the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, but only if one assumes a singular, limited evolutionary line. A broader view allows for the possibility that these different beings come from alternate versions of Earth across a multiverse. In other words, they may be interdimensional and Earth-originated. Perhaps in one alternate reality, the dinosaurs never went extinct and eventually evolved into bipedal intelligent species. In another, insects or other species may have reached sapience before humans even emerged. In yet another version of Earth, humans may have evolved millions of years earlier than we did here, and the typical gray alien is simply us from a parallel but temporally advanced version of Earth. Some of these entities might not be visiting from the stars, but from adjacent timelines or realities where different evolutionary outcomes occurred. Another variation involves ancient NHIs that achieved interstellar or interdimensional travel and invited other civilizations to visit or settle on Earth for reasons beyond our comprehension. In that case, some of the diversity of NHI beings reported might reflect a sort of cosmic diplomatic ecosystem, with Earth serving as a meeting point, habitat, or strategic location. Biblical interpretations may also fit into this overlapping category. Stories of angels and demons could be describing ultraterrestrials, beings originally from this dimension who transcended it, or they might represent fully interdimensional intelligences that operate from higher realms. The former might be physical entities who develop the ability to traverse higher dimensions, while the latter would be native to those dimensions, perhaps explaining why ancient humans interpreted them as divine or supernatural. Those who dwell underground could align with the biblical concept of demons or entities from hell, while those observed descending from the sky in brilliant craft, such as the vision of Ezekiel's chariot, may represent beings from lunar outposts or orbital installations, misinterpreted as angels or gods. Whether their intentions are benevolent, malevolent, or somewhere in between, these differing origins could have shaped the religious dualities of good versus evil. Origin disinformation. Another possibility is that the truth about the origin of these beings is being deliberately obscured by those in power, particularly by elements within the military-industrial complex or intelligence community. If certain agencies are aware that these beings are actually cryptoterrestrials, indigenous to Earth or its hidden domains, it would be in their best interest to perpetuate a far more fantastical narrative. A story that points to extraterrestrials from distant star systems is far less threatening than one suggesting a pre-human race that still resides alongside us, hidden in the Earth, oceans, or moon. Former AFOSI disinformation agent Richard Doty is one individual often implicated in this strategy. He's accused of giving Jamie Shandera a roll of film containing the infamous NJ-12 documents, which describe the Roswell crash as involving extraterrestrials from another planet. If there's truth to the Roswell incident, and if the retrieved craft and bodies did not originate from outer space, then Doty's documents could be a deliberate attempt to reroute public speculation away from cryptoterrestrials or black budget tech and toward the safer, more speculative narrative of little green or gray men from Zeta Reticuli. This kind of misdirection benefits secret programs by muddying the waters. Another possible example is Bob Lazar. Regardless of your stance on his credibility, if you take his testimony at face value, it's plausible that he too was fed disinformation during his initiation into the program. He was told the craft he worked on came from Zeta Reticuli, based on briefing documents, but given the compartmentalization of such programs, there would have been no reason for them to share that information with him. His job was to reverse engineer propulsion systems, and he likely would not have been informed of the pilot's point of origin. That particular star system became popularized following the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case in the 1960s, so perhaps those documents were designed to intentionally echo the most publicized alien narrative at the time. It's possible even the beings themselves, if they interact with abductees, could be complicit in this disinformation strategy, perpetuating the off-world origin story to conceal their actual presence here on Earth. The volcano connection. A growing number of credible video recordings show anomalous craft either entering or exiting active volcanoes, sometimes live on camera. One theory suggests they may be harnessing geothermal energy from volcanic activity. If their craft use some form of gravity shielding or inertial dampening, they could likely resist extreme temperatures and pressures, just as they appear to travel effortlessly through water and high-speed airspace. This leads to the possibility that volcanoes provide direct access points to extensive underground domains. From a strategic standpoint, it makes perfect sense. Volcanoes are rarely approached by humans, heavily monitored, and largely inaccessible. That makes them ideal portals for concealing traffic to and from underground bases. A central vent could connect to a network of lava tubes, naturally formed tunnels that could be expanded, reinforced, and transformed into a vast subterranean infrastructure. These tubes often span miles and reach depths of 300 feet or more. Some even feature multiple levels and temperature-stable zones, especially in colder regions like Alaska or Antarctica. Over hundreds of thousands of years, these natural features could have been expanded into full-blown underground cities, connected by what amounts to an interior highway system. Volcanic heat could supply limitless geothermal power, while underground aquifers would provide water. Early use of these environments for shelter might have later transitioned into fully enclosed habitats, camouflaged from the surface world. With advanced shielding technologies, such locations could even remain safe from active lava flows. Ulterior motives. Perhaps the reason these beings do not openly intervene in global affairs is because human conflict serves their purposes. If humanity remains divided, fighting amongst itself, then we're far less likely to focus on our collective resources on investigating them or unifying against a hidden presence. From their perspective, a world distracted by war and division might be safer than one with focused intent. However, nuclear weapons seem to be an exception. Multiple incidents, such as the shutdown of missile silos at Malmstrom Air Force Base or their appearances during the Fukushima meltdown, suggest that nuclear technology draws particular concern. That may be because it threatens not just our ecosystem, but theirs as well, especially if they dwell underground or share planetary infrastructure with us. One might ask, if that's true, why did they allow Hiroshima and Nagasaki to happen? Perhaps they weren't yet prepared to draw a red line. Those bombs were primitive, relatively low yield, and may not have posed a direct threat to their domains. It's also possible they allowed the tragedy to unfold so that humanity could learn from its own destruction, an event so horrific that it would serve as its own deterrent. Ultimately, it may be naive to believe that they'll intervene and save us from ourselves. If their primary motive is self-preservation, then their interaction with us might be purely transactional. Our survival only matters insofar as it aligns with theirs. Speculating about such a society presents endless avenues for thought. The examples I've shared here are not statements of fact, but rather potentialities, philosophical exercises that explore what the evidence might suggest under different assumptions. There are countless other possibilities, but covering them all would require several more episodes dedicated solely to this one origin scenario. Still, by combining these theories with ancient accounts and modern eyewitness reports, we may inch closer to answering the question, are they from here, and are they part of us? Other potential physical evidence. Chandrayaan-3, India's lunar mission, achieved a historic soft landing near the moon's south pole on August 23, 2023, an area previously unexplored on the surface. This region is of great scientific interest due to its permanently shadowed craters, potential for water ice deposits, and unique subsurface geology. Thermal probe measurements from the landing site revealed a dramatic shift in temperature, up to 70 degrees Celsius in direct sunlight, but dropping below negative 10 degrees Celsius just a few centimeters beneath the surface. This suggests the presence of a highly insulating regolith layer. Some researchers have speculated that these sharp thermal gradients could hint at subsurface voids, structural anomalies, or compositional irregularities, possibly even artificial cavities altering heat distribution. The Rumba LP probe aboard Chandrayaan-3 also detected fluctuating plasma densities near the lunar surface, with measurements varying throughout the lunar day. Surprisingly, it found a low-density plasma environment near the landing zone, which can significantly affect electromagnetic signatures and radio wave propagation. This anomalous plasma behavior could potentially be influenced by underground materials with conductive properties, or, as some fringe interpretations suggest, by embedded non-natural structures with electromagnetic effects that we don't yet fully understand. These interpretations propose the existence of hidden technologies or constructed features within the regolith or lava tubes, potentially emitting low-level technosignatures. The mission's Pragyan rover also detected elements including sulfur, aluminum, calcium, iron, chromium, titanium, and possibly silicon. While these are commonly found in lunar geology, certain combinations, particularly metallic sulfides and conductive materials, can exhibit unique electromagnetic behaviors. If such materials are found to form unnatural patterns, networks, or densities, it could suggest either unusual geological processes or the possibility of technological artifacts embedded in the terrain. The moon is already known to harbor natural lava tubes, hollow tunnels created by ancient volcanic activity. These formations could serve as ideal shelters for artificial installations, especially given their natural shielding from radiation and meteoric impacts. While no direct imagery has yet revealed underground structures, Chandrayaan-3's thermal and electromagnetic data may justify more detailed exploration in future missions, such as Chandrayaan-4 or NASA's Artemis program. Subsurface radar and seismic instruments could potentially confirm or dismiss the presence of hidden chambers of energy-emitting installations. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, has made no claims about alien structures or artificial bases. However, several unusual findings warrant further investigation. Sudden and localized temperature shifts could result from hidden cavities. The detected plasma anomalies might reflect technosignatures that are being masked by the regolith. Additionally, some of the detected elements, such as sulfur and titanium, could support exotic construction materials or unknown energy manipulation techniques, possibilities that remain speculative but not easily dismissed. Turning to Earth, more specifically the Giza Plateau, a new claim related to the ancient alien hypothesis emerged in recent reports by the New York Post. Researchers from Italy and Scotland, using synthetic aperture radar (SAR) technology, claim to have identified an extensive subterranean complex beneath the pyramids. Their findings reportedly include 5 small room-like structures within the Khafra pyramid, one of which contains a sarcophagus. These chambers are said to be connected by pathways leading to even deeper hidden rooms and wells. Additionally, the radar scans reportedly show 8 vertical structures, possibly shafts or wells, that stretch more than 6,500 feet across and descend 2,000 feet underground. The scans also appear to depict massive pillars featuring what look like spirals or coils, possibly indicating the presence of winding staircases, along with large supporting column blocks. According to the researchers, these findings may correspond to the legendary halls of Amenti, including the fabled Hall of Records, a mythical chamber said to contain ancient texts and knowledge preserved from a forgotten epoch. However, despite the intrigue, some experts remain skeptical. Criticisms include the lack of peer-reviewed publications, as well as questions about whether current radar technologies are capable of detecting such deep underground features with the claimed level of precision. Lawrence Conyers, a radar expert from the University of Denver, described the findings as exaggerated, suggesting that SAR systems likely lack the power to generate such images at that depth. Nonetheless, while these claims remain unverified, they should not be dismissed outright. Until the data undergoes further scrutiny, researchers should be encouraged to present follow-up studies and make their findings publicly available. Whether or not the interpretations are accurate, what matters most is that we allow the data to speak for itself before leaping to conclusions, either in support or in opposition. The Nazca mummies are another controversial line of inquiry that may lend support to the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, especially if any are ever conclusively determined to be non-human in origin and not cobbled together animal parts. While it's certainly possible that some of the smaller specimens are modern creations or ritual dolls, the central question isn't just whether they were real living beings, but when they were created. Even if most or all of the figures were fabricated using various animal parts, the critical distinction lies in whether they are ancient or modern constructions. If these mummies, particularly the larger tridactyl specimens, are determined to be over 1,000 years old, then we are left with the question: why would an ancient civilization sculpt or assemble such alien-like figures unless they had actually seen something that resembled them? That alone would serve as circumstantial evidence for contact with a non-human intelligence. According to reports, carbon dating was conducted on the Maria specimen, which suggested an age of roughly 1,000 years. However, without official documentation or peer-reviewed verification of the results, we must withhold judgment. Still, if the data holds up, it would constitute indirect evidence of an encounter or observation of something resembling the archetypal gray. I'm not going to delve into all the conflicting claims surrounding the Nazca mummies here, as it would require an entire episode to cover insufficient detail. Most listeners are already familiar with the skeptical arguments, such as accusations that the mummies are modern forgeries made from animal parts, so I won't rehash those. That isn't to say the skeptical side is wrong, only that it's already been widely disseminated. The key takeaway is this: the case should remain open unless and until it's proven that all the mummies are modern hoaxes. If even one of them turns out to be both ancient and artificially constructed to resemble a non-human form, that would be reason enough to consider that its creator had seen something real. There's no plausible reason for a 1,000-year-old culture to invent such anatomically specific representations, especially if they match modern descriptions of gray-like entities. Dr. Jose de Jesus Salchi Benitez, a Mexican Navy forensic pathologist, performed examinations on several of the Nazca tridactyl mummies. During one dissection, he reportedly discovered a metallic implant in the hand of one specimen, which can be seen in radar images. The implant contained a sophisticated alloy including aluminum, tin, silver, copper, cadmium, and osmium, a rare and valuable mineral that currently costs around $1,700 per gram. Dr. Benitez noted, "It is a very complex metal alloy that requires special knowledge and techniques to be able to achieve it with such quality and purity." This finding poses an obvious question. Why would someone seeking profit use such an expensive and rare metal in a hoax? If the mummies were made for purposes of financial gain, it would make far more sense to use cheap, readily available materials. The use of osmium and other high-value elements suggests, at minimum, an ancient and non-commercial motivation. Common sense alone would seem to rule out fraud for profit, at least in the case of this specimen. Dr. Roger Zuniga Aviles, an anthropologist from the National University of San Luis Gonzaga in Ica, Peru, also supports the authenticity of the specimens. He has stated, "There was absolutely no human intervention in the physical and biological formation of these beings." Along with a group of other researchers, he signed a letter asserting the mummies are genuine. Importantly, they did not assert that the beings are extraterrestrial in origin. Even if DNA testing eventually reveals that the genetic material is terrestrial, but partially human, it could support a cryptoterrestrial origin. Unfortunately, many in the scientific community may immediately dismiss this result as either contamination or misinterpretation, without considering a more nuanced possibility. There are additional experts and medical professionals who have testified to similar findings. A compiled list can be found in a Medium article by John Clark Craig titled Nazca Mummies Disinformation Ploy, or by watching the Unearthing Nazca series available on Gaia, where the testimonies are presented firsthand. The case is far from closed, and further research is essential before arriving at any firm conclusions. Finally, while Jaime Maussan is closely associated with the case, having helped bring the mummies to public attention, his personal beliefs or motivations are ultimately irrelevant to the specimens themselves. I'm not suggesting he is a fraud or fabricator. In fact, I personally detect no signs of insincerity or deliberate deception. However, even if he were biased, that does not invalidate the specimens. The authenticity or inauthenticity of the mummies must be judged on their own merits, not the reputations of those who present them. For a more balanced perspective on Maussan's involvement, I recommend episode 20 of season 2 of the UAP Files podcast, which aired on July 14, 2024. It offers Maussan's side of the story and provides important context for evaluating the larger investigation. Key publications and figures related to the UTH/CTH topic. In addition to the 3 papers discussed in the previous 3 episodes, authored by Hal Puthoff, Tim Lomas, Michael Masters, and Brendan Case, there are several other important works that have contributed to the development of both the ultraterrestrial hypothesis and the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. These publications represent a mixture of speculative theory, journalistic investigation, classified material, and fringe science. Some of the most notable examples include the following. The Adam and Eve Story by Chauncey Chan Thomas, originally published in 1963, is often cited in connection with lost advanced civilizations. Thomas, an American electrical engineer and self-described psychic, worked for McDonnell Douglas in the 1960s and reportedly participated in reverse engineering UFOs. His book discusses ancient cataclysms and argues that advanced civilizations had repeatedly risen and fallen due to recurring pole shifts. While the book doesn't explicitly reference a breakaway civilization, the implications are clear. A heavily redacted version was later declassified and released by the CIA in its online reading room, sparking renewed interest in conspiracy speculation. The 1993 Bengal Tiger Press edition contains 232 pages, while the declassified CIA version from 2013 includes only 57. The document is marked sanitized, suggesting intentional redactions, raising the question, why would such material require classification at all? Some speculate that his access to classified projects through his security clearance may have revealed information too sensitive to public, though this doesn't necessarily validate his more outlandish claims. Operation Trojan Horse, 1970, by investigative journalist John Keel, is one of the foundational texts supporting the ultraterrestrial model. In this book, Keel argues that UFOs are not necessarily extraterrestrial in origin, but are instead manifestations of long-standing Earth-based intelligences that manipulate human perception. He proposes that these beings have presented themselves throughout history in various forms: fairies, demons, angels, and now aliens, to deceive and misdirect humanity. His better-known work, The Mothman Prophecies, 1975, though more focused on cryptids and high strangeness phenomena, also ties into the UTH by exploring telepathic warnings and reality distortions possibly linked to non-human intelligence. The Cryptoterrestrials, 2010, by Mac Tunney's, was foundational in suggesting that UFO occupants are not aliens from distant stars, but rather an Earth-native species, a hidden intelligence that may have evolved alongside or even before us. Tunney's, who tragically passed away before completing the manuscript, explores the possibility that these beings have remained largely invisible, living underground or underwater, and occasionally stage encounters for reasons unknown. His work presents the CTH not as pseudoscience, but as a legitimate alternative to the ET hypothesis, one grounded in logic and history, even if speculative. The Silurian Hypothesis, introduced in a 2018 academic paper by Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, examines whether evidence of a prior technological civilization on Earth, perhaps millions of years before humans, could survive in the geologic record. Though the authors do not suggest any known civilization actually existed, the hypothesis is framed as a thought experiment that lends strong academic support to the idea that intelligent life could have arisen on Earth long before us and simply vanished without a trace due to natural geological processes. I Remember Lemuria, published in the March 1945 issues of Amazing Stories and written by Richard Shaver, marks one of the earliest fictionalized accounts of the cryptoterrestrial idea in modern times. Though presented as a sci-fi narrative, in part due to public backlash, Shaver and editor Raymond Palmer claimed the core story was true. The 10,000-word article describes advanced prehistoric races who built vast underground cities and later fled to another planet to escape radiation from the sun, leaving behind genetically diminished offspring that still inhabit the Earth's inner recesses. The piece laid the groundwork for later CTH interpretations, even if it was marginalized at the time. The Stargate project and associated declassified CIA documents from the U.S. government's remote viewing programs add a strange but relevant layer. Some remote viewers reportedly seen underground structures, ancient Martian civilizations, and non-human intelligences residing in deep caverns. While not formally compiled into a traditional book, these transcripts and briefings provide supporting threads for those exploring the breakaway civilization or hidden Earth species models. Some sections of these documents remain classified for years, fueling further speculation. Visitors from Hidden Realms, The Origin and Destiny of Humanity as Revealed by the UFO Phenomenon, by Brent Rains, 2004, offers a lesser-known but valuable contribution. Rains, an early researcher in the field, argued that many UAP reports may relate more to earthbound intelligences than to interstellar visitors. His work supports the notion that these entities have always been with us, interacting with human civilization throughout its evolution in disguised or misinterpreted forms. Underground Bases and Tunnels, What is the Government Trying to Hide? By Richard Sauter, 1995. Doesn't directly endorse the CTH, but it explores black budget construction and the existence of massive underground facilities across the globe. While many of these installations are presumed to be government or military in origin, Sauter's research has been tied to cryptoterrestrial theories by others in the community who argue that these underground systems may be shared with or were originally built by a non-human civilization. While other publications exist on the topic, this list offers a solid foundation for anyone interested in exploring the cryptoterrestrial and ultraterrestrial hypotheses. One recurring theme among supporters of these ideas is that information related to Earth-based origin theories remains underrepresented in mainstream UFO discourse. For decades, the extraterrestrial hypothesis has dominated the conversation. More recently, the interdimensional hypothesis has taken center stage, pushed forward by both academic curiosity and seemingly metaphysical interpretations. The cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, in contrast, has often been overlooked despite offering a deeply compelling explanation that the intelligence behind the UAP phenomenon may not come from the stars or alternate dimensions, but from right here, our planet, our oceans, our past. Hopefully this episode will help shine a light on that possibility and restore balance to the conversation. If we're going to explore the true origin of non-human intelligence, we must seriously consider the possibility that they've been here all along. Conclusion to Part 1. Ultimately, how you choose to define or refer to any potential non-human intelligence in our midst is a personal decision. Regardless of what the arguments or philosophical deductions might suggest, the lens through which we interpret the phenomenon is influenced by our own reasoning, biases, and understanding. Many of the ideas presented in this episode that seem to support the ultraterrestrial or cryptoterrestrial hypothesis could also be interpreted in ways that support any of the other origin possibilities. It all depends on how the available information, eyewitness reports, and circumstantial evidence are framed, and which assumptions one is willing to entertain. The reality is, there is still so much we don't know about the phenomenon. Our current level of scientific understanding, limited by our current evolutionary development, may not yet allow us to fully grasp their true point of origin or their motivations. It's even possible there are origin possibilities we've never considered, or that we simply lack the conceptual framework to understand. That said, we can still attempt to assign probabilities to different hypotheses based on the patterns, behaviors, and evidence we do have. This isn't about certainty, it's about making the most informed judgments possible using the tools available to us as early 21st century humans. Of course, nobody is being forced to accept any one interpretation, and no amount of logic, philosophy, or scientific evidence may ever conclusively reveal their origins. It may very well be a futile exercise. But right now, it's all we've got. Until and unless they choose to make their presence known in an unambiguous way and directly tell us who they are and where they're from, we have no other choice but to speculate. And even then, can we be sure that explanation would be the truth? Because if they are here and always have been, then it's entirely possible they've gone to great lengths to avoid being discovered. It would follow logically that they might support or even actively perpetuate disinformation or mythologies that obscure their true origin. If that's the case, we may never be able to fully determine where they're from or what they actually want. Be sure to join me in a couple of weeks for part 2 of the UTH/CTH origin possibility, where I'll present hypothetical evolutionary timelines for both distinct hominin species, as well as entirely different forms of life that might have evolved to intelligence prior to Homo sapiens. These speculative models aim to illustrate how an advanced cryptoterrestrial civilization might still be hiding in plain sight, right here among us. Thanks again for watching or listening. Take care, everyone.